I'm Olivia Matthews, 29, standing in the back of a church with an objection burning in my throat as the pastor asks if anyone has reason why my sister and my ex-fiancé shouldn't be wed. 3 months ago, I discovered their affair through texts on his phone while planning our own wedding. Today, they've cruelly invited me to witness their vows, thinking I'd stay silent. They have no idea what I've prepared for this moment. Hey everyone! Before I dive deeper into what might be the most devastating day of my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy family drama with a side of sweet revenge. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how karma catches up to those who betray their own blood. Now, let's get back to how this nightmare began. When I first introduced my fiancé, James Peterson, to my family 5 years ago, everyone adored him, especially my younger sister, Rebecca. James was everything I dreamed of: successful, charming, and seemingly devoted. We met at a charity fundraiser in Chicago where he outbid everyone for a date with me. I was working as an event coordinator, and he was a rising investment banker. Our chemistry was instant, and within 6 months, we were inseparable. Rebecca always had a competitive streak since childhood. Being 3 years younger, she constantly tried to outshine me, taking the same classes in high school but aiming for better grades, dating guys who resembled my boyfriends, even copying my career path in event planning. Our parents noticed, but dismissed it as sisterly admiration. I tried to maintain a loving relationship despite her behavior, always including her in my life despite red flags. James proposed on our 4th anniversary with a 3-carat diamond ring during a surprise trip to Santorini. I immediately asked Rebecca to be my maid of honor, wanting to share my happiness. Her smile seemed forced as she examined my ring, commenting, "It's pretty, but I'd prefer something more unique." I brushed it off as typical Rebecca behavior. The wedding planning consumed the next 6 months of my life. James seemed increasingly distant, often working late or traveling for business meetings. When I expressed concerns, he'd reassure me with expensive gifts and promises about our future. Rebecca, meanwhile, became unusually helpful with wedding details, offering to meet vendors when I couldn't make appointments and volunteering to help James with his vows. One Tuesday evening, while James was showering, his phone continuously buzzed with notifications. Thinking it might be an emergency from work, I glanced at the screen. What I saw froze my blood. Messages from Rebecca. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait until she's out of the picture completely." And James's reply, "3 more months, then it's just us. She suspects nothing." My hands trembled as I scrolled through months of their conversations, intimate photos, detailed accounts of their meetups during my work trips, and cruel jokes about my obliviousness. The betrayal wasn't just a one-time mistake, it was a calculated deception spanning nearly a year. When James emerged from the shower, I was sitting calmly on our bed, his phone in my hand. His face drained of color. "I can explain," he stammered. But there was nothing to explain. The evidence was irrefutable. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Olivia, please." "How long?" I demanded, hurling his phone against the wall. 11 months, he admitted finally, not even attempting to deny it. It just happened. Affairs don't just happen for 11 months. Planning secret getaways while I'm organizing our wedding doesn't just happen. But what hurt most wasn't losing James, it was Rebecca's betrayal. Blood loyalty meant nothing to her. I packed my essentials that night and moved into a hotel, ignoring the barrage of calls and texts from both of them. Their messages shifted from apologies to justifications. "We didn't mean for this to happen. Sometimes the heart wants what it wants. You are always working, and eventually, you need to accept this and move on." My parents were devastated when I told them, but their response stunned me. While what they did was wrong, my mother said carefully, "Perhaps you should consider forgiveness. Family is all we have in the end." My father nodded in agreement, adding, "Rebecca says you've been shutting her out. She's really trying to make amends." That night, I realized I was completely alone in my pain. The people who should have protected me were asking me to suppress my feelings for the sake of family harmony. But some betrayals cut too deep for conventional forgiveness. As I lay in that impersonal hotel room, something shifted inside me. If they wanted me to move on, I would, but on my terms. 1 month after our confrontation, a cream-colored envelope arrived at my new apartment. Inside was a wedding invitation embossed with golden lettering. Rebecca Matthews and James Peterson request the honor of your presence. They were getting married on what would have been my wedding day in the same venue I had booked. The audacity was breathtaking. Attached was a handwritten note from Rebecca. Liv, I know this is difficult, but it would mean the world to us if you could attend. James and I truly believe this can be a new beginning for all of us. We love you and want you in our lives. Please come. I stood in my kitchen, reading the invitation repeatedly, my coffee growing cold beside me. My initial instinct was to tear it to shreds, but something stopped me. A strange calm washed over me as a plan began forming in my mind. Perhaps I should attend, not as the heartbroken ex-fiancé, but as someone with purpose. That evening, I called my old college roommate, Megan, who now worked as a private investigator. I need everything you can find on James Peterson, financial records, communications, travel history, anything suspicious, I explained, my voice steady. Olivia, are you sure about this? Revenge rarely brings peace, Megan cautioned. I'm not looking for peace, I replied. I'm looking for justice. Over the next few weeks, I maintained a facade of reluctant acceptance. I responded to Rebecca's invitation with a simple, I'll be there, which triggered an avalanche of messages expressing relief and gratitude. James remained silent, probably uncomfortable with my attendance. My parents called, commending my maturity and gracious spirit. If only they knew. Meanwhile, Megan's investigation was yielding results. James wasn't just a cheater, he was a financial fraudster. He had been embezzling from his investment firm's clients for years, including from my parents' retirement fund, which he had convinced them to entrust to him. He had also maintained relationships with at least 2 other women in different cities. Rebecca wasn't special, she was just convenient. Most importantly, Megan discovered that James had purchased a one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands, departing the day after the wedding, but had only bought 1 ticket. He was planning to disappear with millions in stolen funds, leaving Rebecca behind just as he had left me. Armed with this information, I refined my plan. I would attend the wedding not to cause a scene during the ceremony, as they probably expected, but to methodically dismantle the foundation of lies their relationship was built upon. I began by anonymously sending Rebecca evidence of James's other affairs, timed exactly 1 week before the wedding, enough to create doubt, but too close to the wedding date to easily cancel arrangements. She surprisingly contacted me, voice breaking, Olivia, someone's trying to sabotage my wedding with fake evidence against James. I thought, maybe it was you. Why would I bother? I responded coolly. You've already taken everything that mattered to me. Her voice softened. I'm sorry, truly. But I know James loves me. We're soulmates, it's different with us. I almost felt sorry for her delusion. I hope you're right, Rebecca. For your sake. I ended the call knowing the seed of doubt had been planted. Next, I contacted the FBI with evidence of James's financial crimes, ensuring they would be building their case, but wouldn't make a move until after I executed my plan. I also reached out to clients he had defrauded, including influential people who had the power to instantly destroy his reputation. 3 days before the wedding, I visited my parents, presenting them with proof that James had been siphoning money from their accounts. Their shock and anger were palpable. We trusted him, my father said, his hands shaking as he reviewed the documents. We defended him and Rebecca because we thought he was family. Will you still attend the wedding? I asked quietly. My mother's eyes hardened. We'll be there. But not for the reasons they think. On the eve of the wedding, I sat alone in my apartment, reviewing every detail of my plan. Texts from Rebecca showed increasing nervousness. James has been acting strange. Did you talk to Mom and Dad? They're being weird too. I left her messages unanswered. As I prepared for bed, I received an unexpected call from James himself. Olivia, he slurred, obviously drunk. I need to know you won't make a scene tomorrow. Would I do that? I asked innocently. I don't know what you're capable of anymore, he admitted. People are getting anonymous messages. Rebecca's freaking out. Your parents suddenly want to discuss business with me after the honeymoon. Perhaps your past is catching up with you, James, I suggested. But don't worry about me. Tomorrow, I'll be exactly where you and Rebecca want me, watching quietly from the audience. He paused before asking, do you ever think about us? What we had? The question ignited my anger. There was never an US, James. There was only what you pretended to be while plotting with my sister behind my back. Sleep well. Tomorrow's your big day, after all. As I hung up, I felt no satisfaction from his obvious distress, only a cold determination to see this through. Tomorrow would be a day none of us would forget, but for very different reasons than James and Rebecca anticipated. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect weather, sunny skies with a gentle breeze, exactly what Rebecca had always dreamed of for her special day. I dressed meticulously in a deep burgundy dress, elegant but understated. I didn't want to attract attention, not yet anyway. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 p.m. at Lakeside Chapel, followed by a reception at the Grand Hamilton Hotel, the exact venues I had selected for my own wedding. As I parked my car, I noticed FBI agents positioned discreetly around the perimeter, confirming that my arrangements were in place. Inside the chapel, I slipped into a seat in the back row. Guests whispered as I passed, their expressions a mixture of pity and curiosity. My parents sat stiffly in the front row, their faces unreadable. They acknowledged me with subtle nods. Rebecca's college friends served as bridesmaids, wearing the same shade of blue I had chosen for my wedding. The music began, also my selected playlist, and James appeared at the altar, handsome in his tailored tuxedo, but visibly tense, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked with mine. I smiled pleasantly, causing him to shift uncomfortably. Then came Rebecca, floating down the aisle in a gown suspiciously similar to the one I had ordered, perhaps even the same dress. Our mother dabbed tears that seemed more from distress than joy. As Rebecca passed my row, she faltered slightly, her confident smile wavering when she saw me. I maintained my composed expression, offering a small wave that clearly unnerved her. The ceremony proceeded according to plan. The pastor spoke about honesty, commitment, and fidelity, words that hung heavy in the air given the circumstances. When he reached the pivotal moment, if anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace, the chapel fell into profound silence. Everyone turned toward me, clearly expecting an outburst. Rebecca and James both tensed, bracing themselves. But I remained seated, silent, smiling enigmatically. The collective exhale of relief was almost audible as the pastor continued. Just as he was about to pronounce them husband and wife, I finally stood. Actually, I said, my voice clear and steady, I do have something to say. Rebecca's face drained of color. James looked like he might be sick. The guests murmured in anticipation of the drama they had been expecting all along. I've recently discovered some information that the bride and groom, and everyone here, should know before this marriage is finalized. I moved toward the front of the chapel, retrieving a folder I'd strategically placed earlier. Olivia, please, Rebecca begged. Don't do this. Do what exactly? I asked innocently. I'm just making sure everyone has all the facts. Isn't that what family does? Looks out for each other. James stepped forward. Whatever she's about to say is a lie born from bitterness, he announced to the guests. She couldn't accept that Rebecca and I fell in love. I laughed softly. Is that what you told Rebecca? That's interesting, because according to these, I held up printed emails, you told Sophia from Boston that you were divorcing your wife to be with her. And according to these, I produced another set of documents. You promised Melissa from Seattle a new start in the Cayman Islands, where you've booked a one-way ticket for tomorrow. Strangely, only one ticket. Rebecca turned to James, confusion and horror dawning on her face. What is she talking about? Before he could respond, the chapel doors opened and 2 FBI agents entered, followed by several of James's clients. But perhaps more relevant to everyone here is this, I continued, handing the folder to the nearest agent. Evidence that James has embezzled approximately $12 million from his clients, including $350,000 from our parents' retirement fund. Chaos erupted. James lunged toward an exit but was quickly apprehended. Rebecca collapsed into her maid of honor's arms, sobbing hysterically. Guests stood in shock, cameras flashing as James was handcuffed and read his rights in front of everyone. Through the commotion, I approached Rebecca, who looked up at me with mascara-streaked cheeks. "You knew," she accused. "You set this all up." "I knew he was going to betray you just like he betrayed me," I confirmed. "The difference is, I decided to stop him before he could hurt anyone else." "I loved him," she whispered. "No," I corrected gently. "You loved winning. You loved taking what was mine. But some victories come with hidden costs." I turned to leave, but Rebecca grabbed my wrist. "How did you find all this out?" "I did what you never bothered to do," I replied. I looked beyond the charming facade. I asked questions instead of accepting convenient lies. I removed her hand from my wrist. "You chose him over me, your own sister. Family loyalty meant nothing to you, so why should it mean anything to me?" As I walked down the aisle toward the exit, guests parted like the Red Sea. Some looked horrified, others impressed, but most seemed unsure how to react to such an unprecedented situation. My parents stood frozen, torn between their daughters in a way they had never been before. Outside the chapel, with the sounds of confusion still echoing behind me, I finally took a deep breath of fresh air. For the first time in months, my chest didn't feel tight with anger and betrayal. I hadn't just exposed James, I had freed myself from the burden of silent suffering. Whether or not Rebecca would ever understand or forgive me was no longer my concern. I had reclaimed my power in the only way available to me. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed with messages from witnesses already posting about the dramatic wedding on social media. Within hours, it would be trending. By tomorrow, James's professional reputation would be irreparably destroyed. And Rebecca would forever be known as the bride whose wedding ended in her groom's arrest. Some might call it excessive revenge. I called it justice. In the days following what local news dubbed the wedding arrest, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted exclusive interviews, reality TV producers offered deals, and distant relatives called to either condemn my vindictiveness or praise my brave stand. I declined all media requests and blocked most callers, needing space to process everything. The viral videos of James being escorted out in handcuffs, while Rebecca sobbed in her wedding dress, had racked up millions of views. The story had all the elements people craved: betrayal, deception, and public comeuppance. Strangers on the internet debated whether I was a hero or villain, dissecting every detail of our triangle with the confidence of those who know nothing about the real people involved. 3 days after the wedding, I was sitting in my apartment, mindlessly scrolling through the online chaos, when my doorbell rang. Standing there was Diana Peterson, James's mother, looking considerably older than she had at the ceremony. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated before stepping aside. Diana had always been kind to me, and I couldn't bring myself to shut the door on her. She settled on my couch, declining my offer of tea. "I wanted to apologize," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "Not just for what James did to you, but for raising a son capable of such deception." "You didn't know either," I said, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. "No, but I should have seen the signs." The entitlement, the ease with which he lied. She shook her head. "His father and I gave him everything, never teaching him consequences. Now everyone's paying the price for our failure." We talked for hours. Diana revealed that James had shown manipulative tendencies since childhood, charming his way out of trouble and blaming others for his mistakes. His parents had attributed it to boyish mischief, never imagining he would evolve into a sophisticated con man who viewed relationships as transactions and people as pawns. "Have you spoken with Rebecca?" I asked eventually. "I tried. She refused to see me," Diana sighed. "She's staying with your parents, hardly eating or speaking according to your mother. She blames everyone but herself, James for lying, you for exposing it, me for raising him, even the pastor for allowing the objection." She reached for my hand. "I want you to know that I'm testifying against James. The prosecutor says my testimony about previous incidents might help establish a pattern of fraud." Her willingness to stand against her own son moved me. "That must be incredibly difficult." Less difficult than living with the knowledge that I enabled his behavior by remaining silent before, she replied firmly. After Diana left, I felt a strange sense of peace. In her, I had found an unexpected ally, someone else deeply hurt by the same person, choosing accountability over blind loyalty. The following week brought another surprise visitor, my father. He stood awkwardly at my threshold, looking both defiant and contrite. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he admitted as I let him in. "She's still." He trailed off, taking Rebecca's side. I finished for him. Trying to hold what's left of the family together, he corrected gently. "But I needed to see you myself, to tell you that I understand why you did what you did." He explained that after the initial shock of the wedding spectacle, he had reviewed all the evidence I'd provided about James's financial schemes. The scope of the fraud was even greater than I had realized. James had been preparing to disappear with nearly all of my parents' savings, along with millions from other victims. When I think about what would have happened if you hadn't intervened, my father's voice broke. Rebecca would have been abandoned, penniless and humiliated. Your mother and I would have lost everything we worked for. You saved us, Olivia, even while we were failing you. His acknowledgement unleashed emotions I had suppressed for months. I cried for the first time since discovering the affair, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that my father awkwardly tried to soothe by patting my back, the way he had when I was a little girl skinning my knees on the driveway. "I wanted you to choose me," I admitted through tears. "Just once, I wanted to be the daughter you defended." "I know," he whispered. "I've always struggled with Rebecca's demands for attention. She was louder, more insistent, and somehow more fragile. You were always so self-sufficient that it was easy to take you for granted." He looked away, ashamed. "It was wrong, and I'm sorry. Hey everyone, I hope you're still with me through this emotional roller coaster." This next part of the story was truly the turning point for me, where everything I thought I knew about family, forgiveness, and justice was challenged in ways I never expected. If you've ever had to rebuild relationships after betrayal or found strength in unexpected places, you know this journey isn't simple or straightforward. Before I continue with what happened next, I'd love if you could hit that like button if you're finding any part of this story relatable. Your support helps me find the courage to keep sharing these difficult truths. Now, let me tell you about how things started to shift in truly unexpected ways. As we talked into the night, my father revealed something that stunned me. Rebecca had been in therapy since childhood for severe competitive tendencies and attachment issues. Her therapists had consistently warned my parents that her obsession with matching or surpassing my achievements wasn't normal sibling rivalry, but something deeper and potentially destructive. We minimized it, my father admitted. Called it a phase. When the therapist suggested more intensive treatment after Rebecca deliberately crashed your car the day you got your license, we switched therapists instead. This revelation recontextualized our entire childhood. What I had interpreted as normal, if intense, sibling competition had actually been something requiring professional intervention. My parents' failure wasn't just in consistently prioritizing Rebecca's feelings over mine. It was in denying her the help she genuinely needed while enabling behaviors that ultimately harmed everyone, including herself. "Is she getting help now?" I asked. She refused initially, but after the FBI showed her evidence of James's other relationships, he shook his head sadly. The humiliation finally broke through her denial. "She started seeing someone last week." Before leaving, my father asked a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you'll ever forgive any of us?" I considered this carefully. "Forgiveness isn't a single decision. It's a process," I said finally. "I'm willing to begin that process with you and Mom." "With Rebecca?" "I honestly don't know." He nodded, accepting this limited opening as more than he deserved. "That's fair. We'll take whatever you're willing to give." As the criminal case against James progressed, I was called to provide testimony about his financial manipulations. The prosecution had built a solid case, combining evidence from multiple victims, financial institutions, and James's own digital trail. During my deposition, I learned that following his arrest, 3 more women had come forward with stories eerily similar to mine, romantic relationships cultivated specifically to gain access to their wealth or their family's resources. Rebecca, despite being listed as a witness, was deemed too emotionally unstable to testify. According to my father, she alternated between defending James, he must have had a good reason, and vilifying him. He used me to hurt Olivia, never fully accepting her own agency in the affair. 6 weeks after the wedding disaster, my mother finally reached out, inviting me to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. I arrived early, watching her through the window as she approached, noting how she had aged in just a few months. "Thank you for coming," she said formally as she sat down. We ordered coffee and sat in uncomfortable silence until she finally spoke again. "I've been unfair to you. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but it was a start. Rebecca is still my daughter, and she's in tremendous pain," she continued. "But that doesn't excuse what she did to you, nor does it justify how your father and I handled it. You always protected her," I observed, "even from the consequences of her own choices." "Yes," my mother admitted. "We thought we were helping, but we were actually making it impossible for her to develop emotional resilience or ethical boundaries." The therapist says she stopped, seeming to realize this information wasn't hers to share. "Dad told me about her diagnosis," I said gently. My mother looked relieved not to have to navigate that revelation. "Then you understand it's complicated. But complexity doesn't erase responsibility. Rebecca chose to pursue James, knowing what it would do to you. We chose to minimize her betrayal rather than acknowledge your pain. These were choices, not compulsions, and you deserved better from all of us." As we talked, I realized something important. Accountability didn't require permanent estrangement. I could acknowledge my family's profound failures while remaining open to genuine change. True justice wasn't about punishing Rebecca indefinitely, but about establishing healthier boundaries and expectations moving forward. "I'd like to try family therapy," my mother suggested tentatively. "All of us together, with someone qualified to help navigate this kind of breach." I didn't immediately agree, but I didn't refuse either. "I'll think about it," I promised, knowing that rebuilding would be neither quick nor easy, but perhaps not impossible either. As I drove home, I reflected on how differently things had unfolded than I had anticipated. The dramatic wedding revelation had delivered the public justice I thought I wanted, but the real healing was happening in these quiet, painful conversations, in my father's tears, Diana's remorse, and my mother's belated accountability. The road ahead remained uncertain, but for the first time since discovering the betrayal, I could envision a future not entirely defined by what had been broken, but by what might, with care and time, be rebuilt. For months after the wedding that wasn't, I sat in a crowded courtroom, watching as James Peterson was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, a stark contrast to the designer suits he'd once favored. The financial crimes trial had attracted considerable media attention, with journalists sketching furiously as the proceedings began. I testified on the third day, recounting how James had systematically integrated himself into my family, gained access to my parents' financial information, and positioned himself as their trusted advisor. The prosecutor presented evidence of how he had used our relationship to identify potential victims, including wealthy friends and colleagues I had introduced him to. "Ms. Matthews," the prosecutor asked, "did the defendant ever give you reason to suspect his financial dealings were illegal?" "Not directly," I answered truthfully. But looking back, there were inconsistencies, lavish spending that exceeded his stated income, vague explanations about investment strategies, insistence on handling all our joint finances himself. James stared at me throughout my testimony, his expression unreadable. I refused to meet his gaze, focusing instead on the jury, 12 ordinary people trying to comprehend how someone could systematically betray those who trusted him most. During cross-examination, James's defense attorney attempted to paint me as a vengeful ex-fiancé fabricating accusations. "Isn't it true that you orchestrated a public humiliation of my client and your sister out of jealousy?" he asked smugly. "I exposed criminal activity and prevented further victims," I corrected calmly. "The FBI has verified every document I provided. My personal feelings about their relationship are irrelevant to whether Mr. Peterson committed fraud." The defense strategy backfired spectacularly. By focusing on the romantic triangle rather than refuting the financial evidence, James's attorney only reinforced the prosecution's portrayal of him as someone who exploited personal relationships for monetary gain. When James finally took the stand in his own defense, he was a shadow of the confident man I had once loved. He claimed ignorance of regulations, blamed administrative oversights, and suggested his clients had misunderstood the risks involved in his investment strategies. The jury seemed unconvinced, especially when confronted with emails in which he boasted about fleecing rich idiots and detailed his escape plans. On the final day of the trial, as closing arguments concluded, I noticed Rebecca slip into the back of the courtroom. She had lost weight, her designer clothes hanging loosely on her frame, dark circles under her eyes. She had not attended any previous sessions, claiming through our parents that the publicity was too traumatic. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts: wire fraud, investment advisor fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. The judge, citing the extraordinary breach of trust and predatory nature of James's crimes, sentenced him to 18 years in federal prison and ordered restitution exceeding $15 million. As the courtroom emptied, Rebecca remained seated, staring at the space where James had stood. I hesitated, then approached her. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said, sitting beside her. "I needed to hear it directly," she replied, her voice hoarse. Part of me still thought there might be an explanation, that everyone was wrong about him. She looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "But there isn't, is there? He's exactly what they said." "What you said?" "Yes," I confirmed gently. "He is." We sat in silence for several minutes before Rebecca spoke again. "My therapist says I need to make amends as part of my recovery. But she also says you're not obligated to accept them or forgive me." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I've rehearsed this conversation 100 times, but now I don't know what to say." "Why did you do it?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. Not just the affair, but inviting me to the wedding, using my venue, my date, even wearing a dress like the one I chose. Rebecca's face crumpled. "I wanted your life," she admitted, tears flowing freely. "I always have. You were always the smart one, the pretty one, the one everyone admired. Mom and Dad gave you attention for achievements, while I only got notice when I was in trouble. When you introduced James, he was like another thing you had that I didn't: successful, handsome, devoted. So you took him to hurt me." The thought was almost too painful to contemplate. "Not initially," she said, surprising me. "At first, I just enjoyed the attention when he complimented me or texted me. It made me feel special, chosen over you for once." She wiped her tears. "By the time it became physical, I had convinced myself we were in love, that he was meant for me all along. The wedding invitation, using your venue, my therapist says that was me trying to rewrite history, to make it legitimate by erasing you from the narrative." Her explanation wasn't justification, but it offered insight into the wounded psychology that had driven her actions. The sister I had grown up with was both perpetrator and victim, responsible for her betrayal yet also manipulated by a predator who recognized and exploited her vulnerabilities. "Do you hate me?" she asked finally. "I did," I acknowledged. "Sometimes I still do. But mostly I'm sad for everything we've lost." As we left the courthouse, a swarm of reporters descended, shouting questions and thrusting microphones toward us. Instinctively, I stepped in front of Rebecca, shielding her from the cameras. "No comment," I stated firmly, guiding her through the crowd to my car. Once inside, she looked at me with confusion. "Why did you do that? Protect me?" I considered her question carefully. "Because whatever happened between us, those vultures don't deserve to feast on our pain. And because despite everything, you're still my sister." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a recognition of our complicated, damaged bond. As I drove her back to our parents' house, we existed in a liminal space between estrangement and reconciliation, both aware that rebuilding trust, if possible at all, would require more than apologies or single acts of kindness. "The family therapy session is on Thursday," Rebecca said as we pulled into the driveway. "Mom said she told you." "She did. Will you come?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the decision. I don't know. It's not just about you and me. It's about patterns that go back to childhood, about mom and dad enabling behavior they should have addressed decades ago. Rebecca nodded, accepting my uncertainty. For what it's worth, they're really trying now. Dad canceled his golf membership to pay for my intensive treatment program. Mom joined a support group for parents of adults with personality disorders. She opened the car door but paused before exiting. I know it shouldn't have taken all this to make them see the problems. I'm sorry it did. As she walked toward the house, shoulders hunched against invisible judgment, I realized that the revenge I had orchestrated had yielded unexpected results. I had exposed James not just for my own vindication, but for everyone he had hurt or planned to hurt. And in doing so, I had inadvertently forced my family to confront dysfunctions we had normalized for too long. That night, I called the therapist leading the family sessions and scheduled a private appointment. Before committing to joint therapy, I needed to establish my own boundaries and expectations. Recovery wouldn't erase what had happened, but perhaps it could forge something new from the wreckage, something healthier than what had existed before. 6 months after James's sentencing, I stood outside Lakeside Women's Correctional Facility, questioning my decision to accept Rebecca's request for a visit. She had been incarcerated for 3 months on charges related to James's schemes, not because she had actively participated in the fraud, but because she had spent money she knew came from illicit sources and had destroyed evidence after his arrest. Her sentence was relatively light, 18 months, with potential for early release based on good behavior and completion of a rehabilitation program. Still, seeing her in prison blues instead of designer clothes, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail without access to her usual styling tools, was jarring. "Thank you for coming," she said as we sat across from each other in the visitation room. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I admitted. Our family therapy sessions had been difficult but productive. With professional guidance, we had begun dismantling the toxic dynamics that had enabled Rebecca's behavior and my parents' enabling patterns. I had established firm boundaries, making it clear that reconciliation would be a long, uncertain process rather than an assumed outcome. "How are you holding up?" I asked, surveying the dark circles under her eyes. "Better than I deserve," she answered honestly. "The therapy program here is intense. No distractions, no escape from facing myself." She hesitated before adding, "My counselor says what happened with James was a symptom, not the disease. The real problem was there long before he came along." I nodded, remembering what her therapist had shared in our family sessions, that Rebecca's pathological competitiveness with me stemmed from profound insecurity and a distorted perception that our parents valued my achievements over her existence. "The hardest part is accepting that I can't blame everything on mental health issues," she continued. "Having a diagnosis explains some things, but doesn't excuse the choices I made. I still knew right from wrong." Her self-awareness surprised me. The Rebecca I grew up with would have clung to any justification, any narrative that absolved her of responsibility. This willingness to confront her actions without deflection felt like genuine progress. "I've been offered a job," I told her, changing the subject. "A position with a nonprofit that educates people about investment fraud. They want me to share my experience, help others recognize the warning signs I missed." "You'd be good at that," Rebecca said sincerely. "Turning something painful into something helpful." "I think so too." The opportunity had come after an interview I'd given to a financial magazine about James's case. The article had resonated with many victims of similar schemes, leading to the job offer and, unexpectedly, a book deal for a memoir about financial exploitation in intimate relationships. "And Mom and Dad?" Rebecca asked cautiously. "They're selling the house," I revealed. "Moving to something smaller since much of their retirement fund is gone. Dad's postponing retirement for a few years." Rebecca winced. "Because of me?" "Because of James," I corrected firmly. "And because of choices they made as parents that they're now addressing. Their enabling wasn't just about you. It was about their own need to see themselves as perfect parents with a perfect family." Our conversation drifted to lighter topics, books Rebecca was reading in the prison library, a stray cat I'd recently adopted, small normalcies that felt precious in their mundanity. As our visiting time neared its end, Rebecca reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. "I had this fantasy that by the time I got out, you might have forgiven me," she confessed. "But I understand now that's not how it works. Real forgiveness can't be demanded or scheduled." "No," I agreed. "It can't. I'm trying to become someone worthy of a second chance," she said, eyes glistening. "Not just with you, but with myself. I don't want to be the person who did those things anymore." As I left the facility, I felt neither the burning rage that had fueled me during the wedding revelation nor the numb detachment that had followed. Instead, I experienced something more nuanced, a sad acknowledgement of all that had been lost alongside cautious hope for what might still be salvaged. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Diana Peterson, James's mother. She had moved across the country after her son's sentencing, unable to bear the community's whispers and judgmental stares. Her message was brief but meaningful. "Saw this and thought of you." Attached was an application for a healing retreat specifically designed for victims of betrayal trauma. "No pressure to attend," her email concluded, "but if you do, I'd be honored to cover the costs as a small gesture toward amends." I found myself applying that same night, recognizing that while I had achieved the justice I sought, my own healing remained incomplete. 2 weeks later, my application was accepted, and I found myself in a serene mountain setting with 15 other women, all survivors of profound betrayals by those they had trusted most. During a sharing circle on the third day, I finally articulated something I had never admitted aloud. Part of me still loves the person I thought James was, even knowing that person never existed. And I hate myself for that weakness. "That's not weakness," the group facilitator countered gently. "It's evidence of your capacity for love and trust. The fact that those qualities survive such betrayal isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to celebrate." By the retreat's end, I hadn't magically healed, but I had gained perspective. My story wasn't just about betrayal and revenge. It was about reclaiming my narrative, establishing healthier boundaries, and recognizing that moving forward didn't require forgetting or minimizing the past. Upon returning home, I found a package waiting from my father, a simple silver bracelet with a phoenix charm and a note reading, "Proud of the strength it took to rise from these ashes. Love, Dad." It was the first gift he had chosen for me personally, without my mother's input, in decades. As summer faded into fall, I settled into my new job, finding unexpected fulfillment in connecting with other fraud survivors. My book was progressing slowly but steadily, each chapter a form of exorcism for lingering ghosts. I maintained careful contact with my parents, our relationship evolving into something more honest, if less conventional than before. I visited Rebecca monthly, watching her transformation with cautious optimism. The prison therapist reported consistent progress, noting her growing ability to identify and interrupt toxic thought patterns before they became harmful actions. 1 year after James's arrest, I received notice that my portion of the restitution payments had begun. The amount was small. James's assets had been liquidated, but could cover only a fraction of what he owed his victims, yet seeing the deposit notification provided a sense of closure that transcended monetary value. That same week, I went on my first date since the betrayal with a kind, soft-spoken accountant I had met through a fraud survivor support group. We agreed to proceed slowly, both carrying wounds from past relationships that required careful navigation. "How do you trust again after something like that?" he asked over dinner, his own experience involving a partner who had stolen his identity and emptied his accounts. "I'm still figuring that out," I admitted. "But I think it starts with trusting yourself, your instincts, your boundaries, your worth, even when those have been undermined." He nodded in understanding, and we spent the rest of the evening exchanging stories of recovery rather than trauma, focusing on growth rather than grievances. It wasn't passionate or dramatic, but it felt healthy in a way my relationship with James never had, built on shared understanding rather than dazzling illusions. As I drove home that night, I realized something important. The elaborate revenge I had executed at Rebecca and James's wedding had delivered justice, but my healing had come through what followed: the difficult conversations, the professional help, the small acts of rebuilding trust with my parents, and most importantly, with myself. The woman who had stood up in that church, armed with evidence and righteous anger, had needed to exist. She had protected not only herself, but others James would have harmed. Yet the woman I was becoming, more measured, more compassionate, but no less firm in my boundaries, was someone I was growing to respect even more. Rebecca would be released in 9 months with good behavior. What our relationship would look like afterward remained uncertain. Complete reconciliation might never be possible, but perhaps something new could emerge, a relationship based on earned trust rather than assumed loyalty, on choice rather than obligation. I no longer believed in the fairy tale version of forgiveness, where trauma is erased and relationships return to an idealized before. Instead, I was learning to embrace a more complex reality, that healing often involves carrying wounds that have scarred over rather than disappeared completely, that forgiveness can coexist with caution, and that moving forward doesn't require pretending the past never happened. The justice I had sought had been delivered, but the peace I needed had required a different, more personal journey. One that continued with each boundary maintained, each honest conversation engaged, and each step taken toward a future defined by my choices rather than others' betrayals. 2 years after the wedding that wasn't, I stood in another church, this time as a guest rather than an objector. My parents were renewing their vows for their 40th anniversary, a symbolic recommitment after nearly losing everything financially and emotionally in the aftermath of James's crimes and Rebecca's betrayal. The ceremony was small and unpretentious, nothing like the elaborate wedding they had helped finance for Rebecca and James. My mother wore a simple blue dress rather than designer couture, and my father had personally written his vows instead of hiring a professional speechwriter as he once might have. We promised to face difficulties together honestly, they recited in unison, without hiding from uncomfortable truths or sacrificing one family member's well-being for another's convenience. The pointed acknowledgement of their past failures brought tears to my eyes. They were different people now, humbled by loss, deepened by therapy, more authentic in their connections not just with their daughters, but with each other. Rebecca sat in the front row, released from prison 4 months earlier, and now living in a halfway house, while working as an administrative assistant at a women's shelter. She had lost the polished gloss that had once defined her appearance, but there was a grounded quality to her now, a hard-won authenticity that suited her better than her former artificial perfection. After the ceremony, during the modest reception in my parents' downsized backyard, Rebecca approached me with a small gift box. "It's not much," she said hesitantly, "but I wanted to give you something to mark the occasion." Inside was a delicate silver photo frame containing a faded photograph I had never seen before, Rebecca and me as very young children, perhaps 3 and 6, holding hands and beaming at the camera, without a trace of the competition that would later define our relationship. "Mom found it while packing for the move," Rebecca explained. "It reminded me that before everything got complicated, there was a time when we just loved being sisters." I studied the image, these innocent versions of ourselves existing before jealousy, before betrayal, before the patterns that would eventually fracture our family so completely. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "It's perfect. We weren't those children anymore and never would be again. But perhaps we could build something new, something with realistic expectations and appropriate boundaries, something that acknowledged both our shared history and our individual journeys." Later that evening, as guests departed and my parents prepared to leave for their modest second honeymoon at a nearby bed and breakfast, my father pulled me aside. "I wanted you to know," he said quietly, "that the renewal today wasn't just about your mother and me. It was also about renewing our commitment to being better parents to both our daughters." I hugged him, noticing how much smaller he felt than the towering figure of my childhood. "I know, Dad. And you are. There's something else," he added. "Your mother and I have updated our will." Seeing my confusion, he explained, the old one had uneven distributions, favoring Rebecca based on the assumption she would need more support throughout her life. "We've changed that. Equal shares, equal treatment. It's long overdue." This simple act of equity, this concrete acknowledgement that I deserved the same consideration as my sister, meant more than any verbal apology could have. As I drove home that night to the brownstone I had purchased with my book advance, I reflected on how dramatically life had changed in 2 years. James remained in prison, his appeals exhausted, his rehabilitation prospects questionable given his persistent refusal to fully acknowledge the harm he had caused. His mother, Diana, had become an unexpected friend, our shared experience of betrayal forging a connection that transcended conventional relationships. My career advocating for fraud awareness had expanded beyond the nonprofit to include consulting with law enforcement and financial institutions on identifying predatory behaviors in investment advisors. The work was meaningful, transforming my personal tragedy into protection for potential victims. My memoir, The Wedding Objection: Surviving Betrayal and Reclaiming Justice, had become a bestseller, resonating with readers who had experienced similar betrayals in different contexts. The success had brought opportunities one never anticipated: speaking engagements, podcast interviews, even preliminary discussions about a documentary. Yet the most profound change wasn't external but internal. The woman who had once defined herself primarily through relationships, dutiful daughter, loving fiancé, betrayed sister, had discovered an identity that existed independently of these connections. I had learned that standing alone didn't mean standing abandoned. It meant occupying my own space with confidence and clarity. My relationship with Rebecca remained complicated, neither fully reconciled nor completely estranged. We maintained careful contact, acknowledging progress without pretending complete resolution. Her therapist described her ongoing work as promising but perpetual, a lifelong commitment to managing tendencies that would never entirely disappear but could be substantially redirected. As for romance, I was 6 months into a relationship with Michael, the accountant from the survivors group. We moved slowly, prioritizing transparency and respect over grand gestures or intense declarations. There were no whirlwind trips to Santorini, no 3-carat diamonds, just honest conversations, shared values, and the gradual building of trust between two people who understood its precious and precarious nature. When I arrived home, I placed Rebecca's gift on my mantle, this window into a simpler time complementing rather than contradicting the hard-earned wisdom displayed in framed quotes from my book and photos of fellow survivors I had met through my advocacy work. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Thank you for coming today." It meant the world to Mom and Dad. I replied simply, "They've earned the celebration. You all have come a long way." Her response came quickly, "So have you. I know I wasn't the sister you deserved, but I'm trying to become someone worthy of the sister you are." The message brought a lump to my throat. 2 years ago, I would have dismissed such sentiments as manipulation. Now, I recognize them as part of Rebecca's genuine, ongoing effort to redefine herself beyond the toxic patterns of our past. I thought about how my definition of justice had evolved since that day in the church when I had publicly exposed James's crimes. Initially, I had equated justice with punishment, with the public humiliation of those who had hurt me. Over time, I had come to understand it as something more profound: accountability coupled with the opportunity for growth, consequences that led to genuine change rather than mere suffering. True justice, I had discovered, wasn't about evening scores, but about restoring balance, not just in external circumstances, but within myself. It meant reclaiming my power without becoming hardened, acknowledging pain without being defined by victimhood, and moving forward without either forgetting or dwelling in the past. As I prepared for bed that night, I realized I no longer dreamed of what might have been, the wedding that never happened, the future with James that had evaporated, the sisterly bond that had been corrupted before it could fully form. Instead, I focused on what was and what could still be: a family in recovery, a career born from adversity, relationships built on earned rather than assumed trust. The objection I had raised at Rebecca and James's wedding had indeed changed everything, not just by exposing a criminal and preventing further victims, but by forcing a long overdue reckoning within my family and within myself. In objecting to their union, I had ultimately found my voice, my boundaries, and my path forward. Hey everyone! This journey has been quite the emotional roller coaster, hasn't it? I've shared my darkest moments and most painful truths, and I truly appreciate you staying with me through it all. If anything in my story resonated with you, Whether it's dealing with family betrayal, finding strength after being wronged, or learning that karma does eventually come around, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever experienced a moment where family loyalty was tested, or where justice finally prevailed in your life? Your stories matter too, and sharing them helps all of us feel less alone in these difficult experiences. Please hit that like button if you found value in my journey, subscribe if you want to hear more life lessons from complicated family situations, and share this with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible even after the deepest betrayals. Thank you for listening to my family revenge story. Sometimes the most important lessons come from our most painful experiences. Until next time, remember that reclaiming your power doesn't mean holding onto anger forever. It means writing your own next chapter.